Hey there, I'm Tristan. Welcome to L Space Books. I have a little bit of, I don't know, thoughts to get out. This probably is worth doing like an actual video essay for, um, especially because, with that sort of thing, I would actually make sure that the camera is not crooked, etc. But anyway, all of that aside, I have been thinking, as one does, about books, and just recently we had the Booker Prize announcement, which was Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I think that was the 15th of November that we got that announcement. And it's really cool because I don't think that a lot of people were really expecting this one to win. I know that everybody who I've seen on YouTube talk about it said that, like, yeah, it's definitely a very Booker book, but is it going to win? Probably not. Now, I've not read it yet. I've started it, and it's really good. I like it quite a lot, actually. But it got me thinking about literature, fiction, the Booker Prize, and what we'll call the upper echelons of literature. And as you will have seen from the thumbnail, I have the last 4 years of Booker Prize books right here. I've read 2 of them. Still have not gotten around to Prophet Song, which is a bit of a shame. I think I will do that in December, or just as soon as I can. I definitely prioritized this one, mostly because it's short. Cat's using the litter box if you're hearing stuff going on in the background. But this one really did trigger a sort of like thought spiral in me that I knew what this one was about, and it made me think about some things that have been on my mind for a while. And that's basically why certain books make it onto the Booker Prize list and not others. And I'm thinking very specifically about books from publishers like Tor Books, such as Gideon the Ninth, or something like, the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin from Orbit Books. Those 2 publishers publish primarily science fiction and fantasy, both of the sort of pulp variety as well as literary science fiction and fantasy. And the reason why, of course, this one got me thinking about why this is being marketed as fiction and not science fiction makes me feel a little weird, especially when you compare it to this book, which is undoubtedly, hands down, fantasy. There is no way that you can dissuade me from this opinion that this is historical fantasy, speculative fantasy, if you will. It's got ghosts, it's got monsters, it's got witches, ostensibly, and there's nothing about this that cannot fit within the fantasy genre. So, do I have an organized plan for how to talk about this? No. Should I have probably come up with one before sitting down to the camera? Yes, more than likely, but I think we're approaching what I'm wanting to talk about. And that is what is considered serious literature. My question is, why is this book, Gideon the Ninth, which is, in my opinion, one of the more, as far as a literary standpoint goes, and as far as a craft level goes, and just like a quality of experience in reading this, is top tier. Without a doubt, this is one of the best series I have ever read. The second book in this series remains to this day in my top 5 favorite books ever. And it makes me wonder why a work such as this does not play on the same field as a work such as this. Because both of these deal with similar themes of resisting empire, of ghosts and ghouls and the undead, life after death and all of that, and that all of those sorts of things. And so and both of these are very snarky and satirical and funny and have a very dry wit to them that is funny. And both of them are very darkly funny as well. So it's a rather irksome predicament, or a rather irksome perplexity for me as to why those two books play on such vastly different playing fields. Because there are a lot of similarities in them. Of course, Gideon the Ninth does take place on, and if I'm gonna avoid doing spoilers with that one, but anyway, you could argue that it does take place on a fictionalized world that doesn't necessarily have anything to bear with Earth, but at the same time, it does a really good job of talking about the human condition, humanity's will to survive, tenacity, and I mean also kind of the gross underbelly of what humans are capable of, but so do a lot of these other books. And it's very strange to me why certain books get prioritized for the Booker Prize, because the Booker Prize, I think, is widely held to be the best book written in English of the year. And it's never happened that something labeled fantasy or science fiction is, put up for this prize, despite the fact that this book, in Ascension, was on a short list. I think it was last year, the year before, and this is undoubtedly science fiction. This is very, very science fiction, straight through the time travel and aliens and a whole bunch of other science-y fiction-y mumbo jumbo. Of course, this one didn't win, but this one is still billed as fiction, despite the fact that it is obviously science fiction and speculative fiction. And it's just something that really, it irks me, I think. And I think where this really comes into play is basically the bias against fantasy and sci-fi as being serious art forms, serious works of literature. Because when you think of what the classics are, very seldom do we find ones billed as science fiction or fantasy. Now, I will get into that because there are some that are very clearly science fiction and fantasy, because obviously Lord of the Rings fits into that one. But when you look at something such as The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida, again, that one is dealing a lot with mortality and the human condition, humanity's propensity toward being despicable, but yet having an overarching tendency toward being good. And I think of another book that does those exact things and does it from a phenomenally well executed literary standpoint, and that is, of course, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. This book, in my opinion, is absolutely better than The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida. I still like The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida a lot. It's of the Booker books that I have read, and I've read quite a few, not necessarily prize winners, but definitely ones on the Booker lists. That one is my favorite. But this one is another one that is quite special. And I cannot understand why this has not played on the same playing field as The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida, The Promise by David Galgut, and obviously all of the other ones. And then, of course, you have things that are just written by Terry Pratchett alone, which this one does a lot of really interesting things with talking about, people in positions of power and the senses of duty to a community. And also this one plays a lot with gender, which is really fun. And so this sort of book, in my opinion, absolutely merits a place on a Booker long list. despite the fact that probably the Booker judges might not agree with me. Now, am I fully aware that there are things like the Hugo Award and the Nebula Prize and those sorts of things? Yeah, of course. But why must there be this segregation, I guess, in as far as genre goes? And my sort of suspicion is that there are some people in the literature sphere that like to think that they don't like fantasy. They like to think of fantasy and sci-fi as a lower form of writing. And I do think that it has a lot to do with a level of snobbery on their part, despite the fact that they themselves are likely big fans of fantasy in general. And I'm thinking of 3 examples that I can pull right off of my shelf. The first being A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, The Tempest by William Shakespeare, and Macbeth by William Shakespeare. Fairies, monsters and wizards, witches, and the undead. Fantasy. So many of Shakespeare's plays have fantastical elements in them. These plays are absolutely fantasy. If you like the Odyssey, you like fantasy, because what is that? Magic, gods, monsters, epic quests, the hero's journey, all of that. Do you like the Aeneid, the Iliad? All of that is fantasy. And something that's quite curious is when you look at mythological retellings, such as Stoneblind or Electra, A Thousand Ships, and many, many others, The Song of Achilles, Circe, all of those are billed as just general fiction. And mythological retellings are just fantasy for people who like to think they don't like fantasy. In the same way that those 3 Shakespeare plays are fantasy, but people just don't want to think of them as fantasy because they like to prioritize them and put them in a higher ring of literature because it's William Shakespeare, he's a classic, he's one of the gods of the English language. We can't put him in fantasy because that would take away from his greatness, right? Anyway, I think it's just a strange position that we are in with literature, and I know that a lot of it has to do with marketing and the way that certain editors and agents are allocated or whatever, but still, it's bizarre to me. As an avid consumer of fantasy and sci-fi, more fantasy than sci-fi, it really does irk me when I see sci-fi and fantasy being belittled, I will say, as not as good, not as relevant, not as highbrow as fiction. Even though we very clearly have fiction that has many elements of fantasy that we are indeed prioritizing. But we cannot, of course, we cannot label this as science fiction. We cannot, under any circumstances, call this fantasy, even though it is. So, let me know what you think about this whole conundrum. Do I have any particular, other than what I've said, that people just believe, it seems, in my opinion, and from what I think what I see, sort of the implication of certain things that people say, is that fantasy is just lower brow, and that there is just this level of snobbery when it comes to what is considered fiction and what is worthy of a prize such as the Booker. You know, that's kind of my only conclusion and kind of my only opinion on that. If you have any thoughts about this, I would love to hear them. I think that it's an interesting conversation to have, and certainly one that is worth having, because we as the consumers of stories and literature, you know, it's worth us taking into consideration what and how literature is being sold to us, and what we consider to be the highest forms of literature. Because I think you can probably agree with me that something like Lord of the Rings belongs on the classics list, by all means. And also, so does this. I think that this definitely deserves to be a classic. So, yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's have a conversation about it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this is an interesting video for you. I've wanted to do more of these discussion-y type videos in general, and I definitely have one that is going to be more scripted that I have been talking about for months and still haven't gotten it out. But that's just because writing the script takes a while. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Stick around for more videos coming in the future. I'm getting these out within a week of each other, which is great. But anyway, I'll talk to you again soon. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.